In the last section, we started defining our navigator. We added a new navigator component to main.js, and then we defined a couple of properties on it. Let's continue by fleshing out our routes. So we're going to write some code first to define our routes, and then we'll talk about exactly what's going on with them. So at the very top of the file, or not the very top, but just above our component definition, I'm going to add a new variable here called routes. And inside of it, we're going to add sign in. So this is an object. The key is just a plain key with not necessarily any specific meaning behind it. But the key is going to be our route name. And I'll show you in a minute how the route name is going to be used. The value of the route name is a reference to an actual component. So this sign in right here is making reference to the sign in that we imported right above it. It's the actual sign in component. So our routes object is going to be keys with the route name with value of an actual component to display. The next thing we're going to do is define our initial route. We're going to pass an object to the initial route. So we have one set of curly braces here already. We're going to add one more for an object, and we'll say name sign in. So our initial route is an object with the name sign in. In other words, the first component to render when the application first starts up is a route with name sign in, and that sign in is going to map to the sign in component up here. Next, we'll go ahead and write some code for render scene. We'll say this.render scene, and then we'll go ahead and define render scene right above it. Okay, so whenever our navigator first renders, or anytime that the view stack changes, so we push or pop a view, render scene is going to be called with a route. So the first argument to it is going to be our route, and the second argument to it is going to be the instance of our navigator component. So this navigator right here is an object that has methods like the push and the pop and immediately replace, route stack, and what have you. All those methods that we use for navigation. The route is going to be, the first time that this function is called, the route will be our initial route. So it will be an object with name of sign in. Hopefully nothing too crazy so far here. So again, whenever we're inside of render scene, all we need to do is render a component and return it. Whatever we render is what will be placed onto the stack. Or excuse me, whatever we return from this function is what will be placed onto the stack. So we'll say var component is routes at route.name. So we get our route, we access the route name, which for the first view will be sign in. So you can kind of imagine right here, this is saying like, routes at sign in. And that would return the component sign in. The sign in component up here. So right now, component really equals the sign in component. Next, all we have to do is say return component. And that's it. That's the whole shebang right there. It's like 7 lines of code, but it is, I don't know, in my opinion, this is pretty, I don't know, it takes a little bit to wrap your head around. At least it did for me. So let's do another roundup on exactly what's happening here and just make sure that's crystal clear what's going on. So when we first render our main.js component, it renders an instance of the navigator. The navigator has an initial component, or excuse me, an initial route, which is an object with the name of sign in. When the navigator is rendered, it tries to render its initial route. It needs some base component to show. So the route is passed to the function render scene. Up inside of render scene, we have our route here. We access the route name, which is sign in. We reference the routes object, which we defined up at the top, which returns the sign in component. So our component, var component, will be the sign in component. We then render that component and return it. And this rendered component is what gets put as the initial view inside of our navigator component. It's the initial view. It's the first view on the stack. It's that very, very first view at the very bottom of the stack. All right, so let's go ahead and save this and give it a little shot here. So I'm going to save. I'm going to refresh. And style is not defined. Okay, well, right here, line 25, made a little typo. Style equals style, it should be styles. Let's try that again. And poof, there we go. I know it looks the same, but this is actually very good. This is exactly what we wanted. We wanted to have the exact same view as before. Our initial route here is sign in, so the first component that should be rendered by the navigator is still the sign in component. So this looks great right here. This now means that we can go in the next section. We're going to go into sign in, and we're going to add a button to navigate over to the sign up component. And with that, we'll have some actual real navigation going on within our application. So let's continue in the next section.